In the fall of 1945, the war was over and the world was beginning again. In Campbell, California, a 14-year-old girl dressed in her school colors and headed to a football game with her friends. She never made it to the stands. What followed was one of the largest kidnapping investigations the FBI had handled since the end of World War II. There were thousands of headlines, multiple confessions, a trial, an execution. But at the center of it all was a girl whose seat at the football game stayed empty. This is her story.
Hi, I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Amy.
And you're listening to She Goes by Jane. At the end of this episode and every episode, we will be joined by a special guest who will read an original poem by Amy Baker about the women we're featuring.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Amy.
Vanessa, we have so many new listeners here, and I am so grateful that they found us and can hear these stories of missing and unidentified women.
I am so grateful as well. It's been such a wild ride in the last few weeks as we've been kind of gaining more listenership. But what does that translate to for you?
When I think of every single listener, I think that is one more person who knows these stories now and who can speak the names of the people that we're talking about. We are a victim-centered podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not deeply invested in telling the stories of the perpetrators, so it's really great to see people responding to that.
Right. I was thinking about you when that was happening and what your takeaway from that would be. And that from the beginning, one of your things is this is more people who know this person's name.
Exactly.
And so it's such a great thing that we can be part of that.
Every time we get a listener report, I just think, oh, that is this many people who will know who we're talking about now and who can share that story. And I've been telling these stories for 20 years in a variety of different forms. And
poetry being the main one.
Yeah, so poetry is how this all started.
Mm.
It became a way for me to kind of funnel the grief I was feeling and the feelings that I was going through about hearing these stories into something tangible that I could share with people. And one of the things that I kept on thinking about as I gathered those poems together and they became my poetry collection is that so many of the people that I knew about, their stories weren't being shared in that poetry collection.
Mm-hmm.
And so the podcast has become this really meaningful way for me to share these stories that I might have had to leave behind, or it felt like I was leaving behind.
Right.
And these stories before.
One of the interesting things, like when we approached you about the documentary, was that the poetry is such a big part of it that draws you in, but then you're left wanting to know more. And I feel like the film and the podcast have both kind of filled that gap. Like where we get to hear more about these women and these girls.
Exactly. That actually brings me to the story that we're sharing today, because today's story is one that I encountered way back when I was originally writing my poems. And I didn't write a poem for her.
Okay, so she's not Indo.
She is not Indo.
That was Amy's book of poetry, by the way.
Yes. And it made me feel like I had left her behind in some ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm glad that today I actually get to revisit her story, share her name, and also share some of the surprises that I had in learning more about her more deeply and her case more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
In the early afternoons, 71-year-old Ella Ribble Bodeau would go down to the road and collect her mail from her roadside mailbox. On November 2nd, 1945, she was running late, and it wasn't until 3:20 in the afternoon that she made her way down to the Saratoga-Los Gatos Road. It had seemed safe to cross the road, but as she looked up, Ella saw a dark-colored car coming from Los Gatos. It was coming towards her at a high rate of speed, and Ella leapt back from the road to let it pass. She turned her head towards it as it zoomed by, the wind ruffling her hair. The mid-afternoon sun was angled just enough that Ella could see into the back window as it passed. There, inside, she could make out the figure of a young girl in the back seat. The girl was clawing at the back window with her hands. It was as if she were trying to attract my attention, Ella would later say.
Oof, Amy. Is that a way to open this story?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is part of the story that I hadn't known before, Ella as a witness.
Okay.
And hearing her relate this, she's a grandmother. She's many things. Ella is a musical composer, grandmother, etc. But just hearing that she witnessed this as it was happening.
Right. So you knew quite a bit about the story, but there's this detail that you just...
Yeah. Some nice details that deepen how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're in the fall of 1945. So the world has dramatically changed. The war had recently drawn to a close. The headlines of every paper were covered with stories of the aftermath of that, trials and discoveries, soldiers coming home. But in early November in San Jose, California, one teenager was looking forward to turning 15 in a few weeks. Her name was Thora Chamberlain. She's the oldest daughter of Frank and Lois Chamberlain.
What a beautiful name.
Thora's father and grandfather were contractors, so this is giving you some context to what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
These were men who were standing right on the edge of an economic boom. The wartime effort had brought tens of thousands of workers to Santa Clara County for defense jobs, but civilian home construction had been curtailed during the war efforts. With nearly 60% of the wartime influx deciding to stay in the county, it meant their skills were going to be in high demand. Now, we don't know exactly what the Chamberlain house sounded like that fall, but we do know what was in the air. Likely, dinner conversations in the Chamberlain house that fall were filled with talk of the housing boom, the rapid assembly of a new kind of housing. Their phones would have been ringing all day as her father fielded calls about new projects. That November 2nd was no different than a typical day. And as Thora got ready for school, it was also in the din of conversations and shouts from her two younger sisters, Cheryl and Carol Lee. Both of them were still in elementary school. Thora was a sophomore that year, and she was likely thinking of the day ahead. There was a football game after school, and everybody was going, including her. She'd even dressed for the occasion by wearing the school colors, red and blue. With her red skirt, blue sweater, and one red bobby sock and one blue, she was ready to represent her team in the cheering section that afternoon.
It's so funny because we're talking 1945 here, and it just sounds like a typical day of a teenager now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Not
don't think
much, you know?
We're so far distant from everyday life, right?
Right. But, you know, when kids get ready for a football game here, it's so typical to just put on your school colors like that and be so excited to go. It just sounds like it could be at any time in any place.
Exactly. And Thora, she's leading kind of that typical kind of quiet teenager life, right?
Yeah.
Her name was never in the papers except for the one time the year before when she'd lacerated her foot while waiting at Cowell's Beach. But, you know, she was a Christian Endeavor leader at Westminster Presbyterian Church that her family attended, and she was just a focused teenager. Her friends would say she was mature for her age, and they emphasized that she was not at all boy crazy. So she's just living her 14-year-old life.
Yeah.
And she had been happy at home, her mother would later say. That morning, while Thora attended her classes at Campbell Union High School, the workers at the Cozy Corner Cafe just blocks away were preparing for lunchtime traffic. This is a family-owned cafe that was right in the heart of downtown Campbell. At around 11:30 a.m., one of their first lunch customers came in. He sat down at the end of the counter, ordering soup, pork chops, and coffee for his meal. The man wore a t-shirt bearing the name Londonderry on it and some gray pants, the kind that were issued by the Navy. On his shirt, he seemed to be wearing medals or campaign pins that were given to soldiers after the war. And when he made his order, he spoke in only a whisper so that the waitress, Olga, had to lean forward to hear him. I can only remember 4 words that he said, Olga later related. He said punchboard, beer, restroom, and pinball. All the girls and I felt sorry for him, Louise Spraggio, one of the owners, said. We thought he was a wounded ex-serviceman. The man lingered at the cafe for hours, but seemed friendly enough. He ordered another meal, this time a hamburger sandwich that he ate, and drank 4 beers over the course of the afternoon. Intermittently, he would get up and use the jukebox or pinball machine. He seemed nervous, everyone working that day thought. When he left hours later, he remembered to tip Olga $1.50, but he forgot his garrison cap on top of the jukebox. Shortly before 3 p.m., Thora was wrapping up her school day. She gathered up her school books, her zipper binder, the cowbell she'd painted red and blue to cheer on her team at the football game. On the way to the field, Thora was joined by Rita Byler, Shirley Courtney, Elaine Simeka, Catherine Ban, and Ellen Pearson. Thora was the youngest of the bunch, but the girls were friends and everyone was excited for the game. As they headed over, a dark-colored sedan pulled up next to them by the curb, and the man inside rolled down his window, calling over to the girls. Thora was the one who approached the car. She placed her foot on the running board so that she could lean in and see what the man wanted. The group of teens lingered, waiting for Thora to join them. Rita, Thora called over to her friend, who moved in closer to the car to see what Thora wanted. He's an ex-serviceman, and he says he wants someone to take care of his sister's children for about half an hour. Do you want to? But Rita didn't. She was already thinking about the game. No, Rita said, and moved away from the car, already intent on making it to the game before it started. Thora seemed to be assessing what to do. She'd been looking forward to the game herself, but she turned to her friends and shouted after them, "Save me a seat."
So that's it. She got into the car with him?
Yes.
Yeah.
And for the entirety of the game, Thora's seat remained empty. Back on Pine Street, the Chamberlain family was expecting her home for dinner. She had a Spanish lesson scheduled that evening from 5 to 6 p.m., but she was to come home directly after that. When she didn't walk in the front door that evening, her father Frank began to worry immediately. Thora was responsible, and if something had come up, they would know about it. Frank quickly thought through his last interaction with Thora. She'd kissed him goodbye, just like always, and then got on her bicycle to ride to school. He knew she left her bike at a friend's house and would walk the rest of the way to her high school. She would have ridden it home, but when they checked, her bicycle was still there. By evening, the Chamberlains were looking everywhere for their daughter and had alerted authorities about her absence. The weekend passed, but Thora didn't come home. It was clear Thora was missing, and there seemed to be few clues as to where she had gone. By Monday, desperation had set in. The principal at Campbell called an assembly so that Thora's father, Frank, and the local authorities could address the students. They were hopeful that they would have some information, and they did. Rita's friends said they had seen her in a dark-colored car, a 1932 model. Ellen Pearson said that she'd paid particularly close attention to the car because it was the exact same as her grandfather's. Ellen had even provided some information about what the man looked like, noting that he wore a t-shirt with the words Londonderry, Ireland on it, and what looked like several service medals pinned on. He had, Ellen said, a prominent nose, and when she was asked why she noticed so many details about him, Ellen would later say, well, every girl looks at a man another girl is with.
What do you think she meant by that?
I think what she's trying to say is if a guy's talking to a girl, you're kind of like, who is this person? I don't necessarily think she meant it in a, you're worried about him in a predatory way, but you're kind of assessing who's there.
Okay. But not in, I mean, there seems to be an age difference here too. So it wouldn't be in like a dateable way either.
Yeah, I think what I've come to realize in making this episode is that there might have been a different awareness about the predatory nature or predatory concerns of an older man talking to a teenage girl.
I'm wondering because he's not from town either. So that would be my first thing would be like, well, I hadn't seen him before. So
Yeah, well, so
I wonder if it was more along that line.
Well, at the time, these are teenagers who have been living in what is considered a population boom, right? They wouldn't have necessarily clocked him as an outsider or a stranger to the area because so many people had been new to this area. And a good number of them probably as well had been part of that influx of people to this part of California. Now, another witness, Eileen Hall, she was heading to the football field, and when a car passed by, driven by a man, she looked up and she said, I didn't recognize him. But she did recognize that Thora was in the car with him.
So that's several people now that have seen Thora in that car.
Yeah, so we now know that a car pulled up. We know that she got in, and we know that this man had talked to her. By that afternoon, the first reports of the missing teen would hit the papers, and for the next 2 years, a day would hardly pass without Thora's name appearing in print. That Monday, Sheriff William Emig broadcast there was now a statewide search for Thora Chamberlain. They were operating under the belief that she had been kidnapped. The news prompts the first lead in the case. The San Jose News receives a telegram on Tuesday at 12:23 p.m. The telegram reads, Thora, misspelled, daughter of San Jose contractor who is missing from Campbell High School, was last seen in Long Beach around 10 a.m. Tell Frank Chamberlain for information I will contact tonight around 7.
Okay.
Now, the police, they gathered in the Chamberlain home and they were waiting for this call to come in, but the phone never rang. And it felt like any hope they might have had just slipped through their fingers. By Wednesday, new information surfaces, though. A mother from nearby Belmont wanted to report that her daughters, who were 11 and 7, had been approached by a man 2 weeks before and had asked if they would come with him to San Francisco to help care for a sick friend. They had refused, and a few days later, he approached the girls again, this time in a different car, this time saying he needed someone to take care of his children. This time, the girls were more prepared, and they asked him to wait while they went inside the school to get a pencil and paper. Their plan was to write down his license plate number, but when they got back out, he was already gone. This mother, she reported it to authorities, thinking that these incidences bore a striking similarity to the details surrounding Thora's disappearance.
That was good of her to put that together, because I feel like even now, sometimes it's hard for people to relate one thing to the next like that.
You know, there's been plenty of cases before in which we've seen either sightings of the missing person or sightings of the perpetrator that just end up not panning out.
Mm-hmm.
But at least those leads and sightings have come in, right? And they're documented in some way.
Right.
So this could be one of those things that turned out to be nothing, or it could be something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that day, this is Wednesday, so we're still several days out from Thora disappearing, a search for her was launched, and over 100 of her classmates scoured the countryside looking for Thora or clues about where she could be. Meanwhile, Sheriff Emig flew over the area in a Navy blimp, hoping to catch sight of something, but neither search team found anything that would lead them to Thora. Soon, her parents would issue a public plea for information. 3 paragraphs long, it read in part, "No one can appreciate the grief and anxiety that has been ours for the last few days. For our sake and the sake of all mothers and fathers, please try to help us in our hour of need." Not long after, the FBI would be looking for Thora too, in what would soon be called the biggest FBI kidnapping case in the post-war era. But sitting in San Mateo, another man was reading the news. Chief of Police Robert O'Brien, and he had a sinking feeling that he knew who might be involved. A man living in San Mateo named Thomas McMonigle.
So what made the chief of police think that it was McMonigle?
Well, O'Brien, he had been actually keeping an eye on McMonigle for a while, practically since the moment he and his wife Ina had arrived in town. McMonigle had been a troublemaker, certainly. He'd been a bus driver for the San Mateo Transit Company, and he'd been arrested for assault and battery for an argument with one of his supervisors, for which he'd spent 5 days in jail and was released on 2 years probation. But that was not the incident that gave O'Brien pause. O'Brien had been fielding complaints about McMonigle when he'd been a bus driver. He'd attempted to, quote, pick up school-age girls, offering them rides. It happened so often that the girls had started referring to themselves as the McMonigle Club. And sometimes they'd pretend to make dates with him as a joke.
Okay, so this guy has a history of being obsessed with teenage girls?
Yeah, so to O'Brien, he said specifically that McMonigle seemed to fixate on teenage girls.
Okay.
And this was evidence enough in his mind. But what he also knew is that Thora Chamberlain had gotten into, this was a more specified vehicle, but a 1933 Plymouth sedan, the exact type of car that McMonigle had parked in his driveway over on East Poplar Street.
Okay, so there's a lot of connections, just the way the guy is, but also this car.
Yes, so he's like, this is just maybe too much here. So he picks up the phone, he calls the FBI, and he says, this man, McMonigle, is the guy for you to watch.
But this guy just seems to be a guy doing like you said, he's a bus driver and other things.
Yeah, so all of the people, all the girls who had witnessed him at the school had said he's an ex-serviceman. The waitress said, ex-serviceman. He was dressed as an ex-serviceman. So we're going to pick up more on that in a bit.
Okay.
Now, the FBI soon learned that McMonigle was a man with a record. He was one of the many California transplants, but he was originally from Illinois, and he'd been picked up on vagrancy charges there. So kind of these low-level crimes. He was asking for money. But it was really a different charge that stopped them in their tracks. In June 1934, 70-year-old Almeda Hall had traveled into East Alton to sell dust caps to raise money for her elderly husband's care. At the interurban car station, Almeda had struck up a conversation with McMonigle, who had been waiting there as well. And before she knew it, McMonigle had actually grabbed her by the throat and shoulders before throwing her down on the bench. And she fought back, and he eventually fled. Now, McMonigle would be convicted of assault with intent to commit rape. And he would spend 10 years, almost the entirety of the war, in prison.
So he was actually in jail for 10 years for that?
Yes.
Sometimes we've talked about other cases where people have committed rape and battery and get like 5 years.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that in this case he actually got, I mean, it's not helping our story in any way because things still happen, but
I think this is the case where we start to get some illumination into who he is, right? And who he might be or not be in this instance.
Just completely unrelated, but it's part of what you just said. What is a dust cap?
You know, Vanessa, usually I fall into research rabbit holes and research all the things that I don't need to research, but I did not research dust caps specifically. So I don't know what Almeda Hall was exactly selling.
Okay, so if anyone knows what a dust cap is, sold in the 1930s, let us know, because I am curious about this now.
Now, he is seeming more and more like a plausible and viable suspect in this case, right? On November 8th, McMonigle left his home and he hitchhikes across the country to Illinois, where he's from, before finding his way back to California on a bus. So he goes on this lengthy many-week journey. And following him every step of the way were FBI agents. They were quietly keeping tabs on him. When his bus rolled into San Francisco on December 6th, agents were waiting for him. Boarding the early morning bus, they found him inside, and he was only semi-conscious. Thomas McMonigle, their main suspect, had overdosed on sleeping pills.
Is he going to live through that?
He does. Okay. And though the public won't know the details of his arrest for weeks later, sitting inside the FBI San Francisco office, McMonigle made his first confession. In it, he said that on November 2nd, he had taken Thora in his car from Campbell and then to Los Gatos. From there, they headed on to Santa Cruz, traveling along the state's iconic Highway 1 until they were just south of the San Mateo-Santa Cruz County line. He said Thora was in the front seat and that he shot her with his .32 caliber Colt revolver that he had in his car. Now, this statement is confusing, but he says, if I shot her, this is where it took place. Whatever happened to the girl happened to her at this point. There was but one shot fired. I do not recall replacing the bullet, which was discharged from it on the occasion, and the gun was fired on highway number 1. And at the same time the situation happened to the girl, I'm satisfied the girl was dead at the time. I proceeded more while I'm not certain. It's just what happened to the gun in the front seat of the car. I know it's my responsibility for what occurred at this time.
What a detached, weird, cold way of stating all of this. It's like, if this happened, then this is what happened. And I don't remember this part, but I remember this part. And I was satisfied the girl was dead. Mm-hmm. And the situation that happened to the girl, but then he's also at the end saying, I take responsibility for what occurred. Are you detaching yourself from it, or are you taking responsibility for it?
Yes. So this is some clunky linguistic gymnastics,
right?
Where what you see is he's taking himself out of the active role. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to say something happened without necessarily fully claiming it, although he does say, yes, I'm responsible, but he just linguistically detaches himself.
Yeah, it's such a weird way to put it, all of it.
Mm-hmm. He then said that he drove north along the coast and then he stopped at a place known as the Devil's Slide. Now, at the time, the highway ran right along Devil's Slide. It has recently changed, but you used to be able to drive right along this. And this is a place where cliffs, they plummet a really dangerous 200 to 500 feet from the road down to the crashing surf of the Pacific below. This would not be McMonigle's only confessions. Over the next few weeks, he would confess at least 5 more times.
About 5 more different crimes?
No. But also yes, but no.
Okay.
Most of this is his confessions related to Thora specifically. Each time he places her body in a new location. So Devil's Slide, Crystal Springs Lake, a construction site in Burlingame, a field near Half Moon. And each time he would change the story of how Thora died. So sometimes he shot her to death, although in that weird, twisty, linguistic way. Mm-hmm. Sometimes he woke up from a drunken haze and found her gone. Sometimes she leapt from the car herself and she died before he could bring her to the hospital.
So he just keeps making up these different scenarios.
Yes. So each time it's like change of location and change of how she died.
Do we think that the first time was the right one and he just keeps doing all of these to confuse people?
What I would say is that he is invested in what I would call almost theatrical confessions. Mm. And it's hard to parse out what is truth and fact.
Okay.
Authorities, though, they're having to kind of take him as much as they can at his word. So they travel over 1,000 miles with him beside them. And they're searching for Thora's body in every place he claimed to have left her. Keep digging and you'll find the body, he told them at one point, but they never did. What they did find, though, was clear evidence that McMonigle had been the one to take Thora. Within days of his first confession, searchers were scouring Devil's Slide looking for Thora. Witnesses saw Navy men lowering themselves over the edge of this cliff on impossibly long ladders, hoping to find Thora's body below. Instead, they found a pair of socks. One red, one blue, just like what Thora had been wearing the day she disappeared.
Wow, so it is possible she was there? Or do you think it's possible that he just threw the socks over?
Yeah, so there are many different scenarios. I think it's hard to figure out which confession is true, if any of the confessions are true. The socks do give some credence to the idea that he could have left her body down this cliff, right?
We'll be back in a moment.
Now, when McMonigle said he buried her body at a construction site in Burlingame, he actually meant the one he'd been working at around the time she disappeared. Their investigation into this location had yielded a number of clues. McMonigle had missed work for 5 days prior to Thora's disappearance, and he didn't reappear until November 3rd, the day after Thora went missing. When his boss, Ben Blair, asked where he'd been, McMonigle said he'd been in San Francisco being treated for a venereal disease.
So did that check out with a doctor?
I don't think that did. I think specifically this is a statement he can give his boss that's just going to be like, who's going to ask questions after that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. No one wants to touch that.
They're like nope.
I don't even want to ask a question about it other than, did a doctor say?
Right. Yeah, so I think his boss was just like, When his coworker, Arnold Birch, had asked the same kind of question, where were you? McMonigle said he'd been out the night before with a 15-year-old girl. So he's bragging about this.
How did the guy take it?
He says, Arnold Birch says in response, that's jailbait.
Okay, so...
Yeah, but not serious enough that he reported him for anything.
Right.
Now, all of the men, they do remember that McMonigle had been working on a special project that day that he came back. He'd asked if he could build an earthen ramp. And while excavating that site, the FBI found Thora's belongings buried in the yard. There was her shoe, her English and Spanish books, her zippered pouch, her school notes, and not far away, her cowbell. The one that she had painted red and blue, intending to shake it wildly at the school game.
It's confusing because he said all of these locations and then they find her socks at one and then these items at another, but they're not finding Thora.
Exactly.
So it's just making me wonder, did he say the first way? Was that the real way? And then did he just say a bunch of things to confuse people and then take all of her belongings and put them in those places to further the confusion? Like, there's so many possibilities with this.
Mm-hmm. And, they have to check out all of these possibilities. So they're tracking down all of these pieces,
right?
But none of them are Thora. Now, in one of the stories, again, McMonigle had said that he had shot Thora himself. She met her death in other ways in the remainder of confessions, but this one sticks with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when looking at his car, there was a mark on the pillar between the front and back windows, and it looked like it had been created by a bullet. And when they asked McMonigle about this bullet, he said he remembered distinctly where he had disposed of the bullet. He led them to a tree, which is not far from his home, and he just bent down and picked up the bullet from the ground.
And it was the right bullet?
Yeah. So they were able to match this bullet to a gun, which we're going to get to.
Did he have it in like his pocket this whole time and pretended to find it near this tree? Or did he actually, was it just magically where he'd left it?
No, so it was where he had left it because it had been discharged into the car, they're thinking, based on the mark in the car.
And then it was just at this tree and he just was able to just pluck it out of.
Yeah, so he just remembered distinctly that he had this bullet and just bloop, threw it out by this tree.
Okay.
Now, they were also able to recover portions of the car itself, including some upholstery that was still covered in bloodstains. After all of these confessions, there just seemed to be no possible way for him to beat a murder charge. And so their legal strategy, though, had one problem. Thora was still missing. They did not have her body. And without her body, they would have to rely on corpus delicti, a type of prosecution, meaning there would be a conviction without a body. And this is a rare move legally. This is 1945. This is rather untested in the United States at the time.
Even in some more modern cases, we've had a hard time. We've talked about people having a hard time with this.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So very often there isn't necessarily enough evidence, or the powers that be feel like they should have more evidence to give an airtight case.
Mm-hmm.
But in Thora's case, the circumstances and the evidence that they had in this case seemed to demand that they move forward with this. Mm-hmm. Now, at the end of January, McMonigle's trial was set to begin. So in comparison to modern trials, this is actually quite quick. The witness list was lengthy as the prosecution sought to button up the case in the absence of Thora's body. They needed to make sure all the evidence was in order to ensure a win, right? Mm-hmm. With this, McMonigle would be in the same room as Thora's parents for the first time. But one notable absence in both the testimony and the trial audience was actually Ina, McMonigle's wife. Ina was a divorced mother of two when she met and married McMonigle, and the couple hadn't been married long by the time that he was arrested. And Ina hadn't known of his criminal history actually until after they had gotten married.
Okay, so she's already been married once, she has two kids, and then they get married without her knowing all of this.
Yes.
So now she's MIA.
So he does tell her after they've been married about his criminal history. So she is aware of it.
Have they been together very long?
No, this is a very short amount of time. But during the course of this relatively short marriage, things had not been smooth. McMonigle had had difficulties keeping a steady job, and he'd been accused of picking up a teenager only months before Thora's disappearance. He'd reportedly gotten her into a car and then driven to a remote location, and only a passerby hearing her screams saved her from what they believed was going to be a sexual assault. Mm-hmm. But the charges against him had been dropped because what would have had to have happened was there would have to have been a trial in an open court. This would have been public record, and her parents hadn't wanted that for her. Now, despite all of this, Ina had tried to see the good in her husband. And this is likely due to a lot of factors, but she had actually given birth to their daughter the day before Thora disappeared. And then when he left for the Midwest, that was on the day she'd actually returned home from the hospital with their daughter. And he had told her he was heading to Los Angeles on a bus.
We already knew he was a terrible person, but just the way he's treating Ina, if we ever had a doubt about how horrible this guy is. Mm-hmm. We've talked about so many other people like him who at home try to still look like the good guy.
Right.
And Meanwhile, they're doing all these terrible things. He's just terrible all around.
Yeah. So, I mean,
imagine doing that. Like when your baby is here.
Well, so that's the reality. Ina is hospitalized right after giving birth, and he uses this as an opportunity to kidnap and kill a teenager. Now, for Ina, there's just a lot to sort out about her feelings and about what's going on. Mm-hmm. But before the trial started, he'd actually sent her a 4-page letter. And in it, he said that Thora had leapt from his vehicle and had died from her injuries. When asked about him, Ina said, "He believes that I will stand by him. I might if he would tell the truth. I might even have some last faint hope of his innocence if he did not tell so many different stories. I do not know what to believe, no matter what he says." Ina filed for an annulment, adding that she hoped that this action might shock him out of his lies.
Not him.
No. With all this, she refused to be one of the many onlookers as the trial began.
I think she deserves her peace maybe at this point.
Yeah, that's actually a lot of what she said is that, she was just trying to live her life and make sense of her life.
She's got a baby. She's got 2 children. Mm-hmm. She's been through enough.
So part of her divorce petition had actually also included that she wanted to not go by McMonigle anymore.
Okay. That makes a ton of sense.
Now, when the trial started, the first witness who was called to the stand was Thora's father. But the most emotional testimony came next, and that was from her mother. Lois was asked by the district attorney how she could identify the red sock that had been found on Devil's Slide, and he handed it to her. "There's a darn here," she said, holding Thora's sock and looking at the spot she had once repaired. "That's my darn."
I think there's also just part of her, like, a mother knows.
Yeah.
The things that belong to their children.
She's holding this, and she's remembering the time that she fixed this for her daughter. Mm-hmm. And this was an incredibly emotional moment in the court. Many of the witnesses started crying when she said that. She was also asked to identify Thora's other belongings, like her shoe that was twisted and water-stained from being out in the elements. Yes, she said, this is hers. It was the first time she had them on since her father brought them home from the shoemaker. Next were her books and belongings, and each time she identified the items as Thora's, including the red and blue cowbell.
That's a lot.
More witnesses were called. This included Thora's friends from school who identified McMonigle as the man they saw Thora talking to, the waitstaff at the Cozy Corner Cafe, Arnold Birch, who worked with McMonigle, and their boss, Ben Blair. There was also Joanne Conkle, the 11-year-old girl from Belmont, whose mother had called the police to say that her daughters had been approached twice by McMonigle that September. And both girls were actually able to point him out and identify him in the trial.
So that mother's hunch was 100% correct.
Yes. And there was also Stanley Lewis Dahlstrom, who had been a chief commissary steward in the Navy. Stanley had been stationed in Londonderry. On September 21st, while his car had been parked near the Fleischhacker Zoo in San Francisco, a footlocker containing his belongings, including his navy pants and t-shirt with the Londonderry marking, were stolen from his car. Stanley's footlocker had been found inside McMonigle's garage.
Ah, and that solves the question of the serviceman.
Yeah, so he was never a service member.
Okay, right? He just stole this guy's stuff and...
Yeah. So there's a question here about premeditation. So we know that he had tried to approach other girls, children, before, and they'd kind of resisted and been wary of his approach. And so there's a question here of whether or not he donned this service member's outfit so that people would be more sympathetic to him and more willing to help him.
Right. But at the time, too, what better way to gain people's trust?
Exactly. The war has just ended. Are you going to turn down this man who has just served his country?
Right.
Now, there was also a man named Thomas Hayes, and Thomas had traveled all the way from Quincy, Illinois. He was the owner and manager of the Park Hotel, a place that McMonigle had spent the night on November 26 under the alias John Cunningham. McMonigle had left behind a suitcase that had then been opened up by the FBI, because remember, they're trailing him across the country. Mm-hmm. It contained a .32 caliber automatic pistol, and the bullet that McMonigle had led them to matched this pistol.
So I guess I'm a little bit confused right now because he hasn't been arrested, but he's being tracked? Is that what's...
Yeah, so basically from the time O'Brien makes that phone call and says, this is a guy you want to keep an eye on, the FBI has their eyes on him.
so they literally just kept their eye on him.
Yeah.
Nobody intervened at that point.
No, because there's not enough evidence to suggest that he actually did it. So they're still collecting evidence, still trying to figure out where Thora is and what might have happened. At the same time, he's just a general suspect, right?
Okay.
So they do have the FBI kind of tracing him. They do follow him across the country, keeping an eye on him the entire time.
So until they had enough to actually bring him to court, they just...
Yeah.
Okay.
So when he makes it back to California, they're like, okay, let's move on this guy.
So at that point, they already had it just all lined up and ready to go?
Yeah. So they were ready with their questions when he makes it to California.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's actually an interesting thing.
That is.
Yeah. So they're quietly building evidence against him,
Okay.
unearthing his history, unearthing any evidence they can find.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, McMonigle himself also takes the stand. And this time he claims that he only made his confessions under duress after being threatened by the FBI. He again states that Thora had jumped from his car and had died from the impact. On February 19th, the jury convened to make their decision on this case. And in just 37 minutes, the 5-woman, 7-man jury returned their decision guilty. There was no recommendation for mercy, and McMonigle would be facing San Quentin's gas chamber. But if anyone thought McMonigle was done confessing, they would be wrong. Investigators had learned not to trust him. The man changed his story so many times it was hard to know where the truth rested. And they'd already spent hundreds of hours digging for Thora's body across multiple counties based on his confessions without luck. So when McMonigle told them that he'd murdered a Black woman from San Francisco in October, they didn't actually put much stock in it. There were no matching missing persons reports in San Francisco at the time that would have matched up to this. Still, Sheriff John McGrath of San Mateo contacted San Francisco authorities, and he asked them to be on the lookout for any missing Black teens or women. McMonigle also claimed that he had killed, in his words, a, quote, beautiful blonde waitress from San Francisco, and buried her body under a log near, quote, the same place I buried Thora Chamberlain's body.
So... at this point, there should be a missing Black woman and a missing blonde.
Yes. Now, all of this, again, it could be just a lot of talk, like something McMonigle, we know, is prone to do, but likely there was a nagging feeling for many that they were missing something. Could this man be responsible for multiple murders? In February, just as his trial for Thora's case was underway, 3 reports came in for a missing woman named Dorothy Rose Woods, who also went by the aliases Burleson and Jones. 23-year-old Dorothy was from Texas, but had been living at a hotel on 909 Howard Street in San Francisco when she'd last been seen in late October. That night, she'd been drunk, and one of her acquaintances, Vannie D. Brooks, had seen her conversing with a white man on the corner of Folsom and 3rd. After that, no one knew what happened to her, but fearing the worst, Vannie, her landlady, Ava Wesley, and her mother all reported her missing that February. Now, McMonigle, he tries to walk back this confession as well, and when asked about it by the press, his lawyer, Stanford Smith, said, "Oh, I don't know about that. He's made so many statements, he probably can't remember what he said." But then, just as his trial for Thora was about to begin, McMonigle changed his story again. This time he said he had strangled Dorothy to death and thrown her body into the sea at Devil's Slide. When shown 14 images of Black women, McMonigle did pick out Dorothy's photo. "That's her," he said.
So he did pick out the right one. So Dorothy is one of the women, and she was reported missing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now, Vannie, who knew Dorothy, was shown images as well. Looking at a series of white men, he identified McMonigle as the man who had approached him and Dorothy that night she went missing. Now, the press isn't exactly clear what went on between all of them, but we do know that Vannie was shown 5 different knives, identifying the type their attacker threatened them with the night Dorothy disappeared. So there must have been some sort of altercation that happened.
Okay, so it was more than just conversing with a white man.
Yeah, something had gone
down. A
down.
knife had been drawn.
Yeah. Now, this knife matches the one that had been found in McMonigle's home. there had always been a kernel of truth to McMonigle's confessions, and now they just needed to sort out the truths from the lies.
I really do believe he almost just instinctively says the truth first and then backpedals, trying to blur it with all these lies.
Yeah, it's fascinating because he has so many things that directly connect him to the death of Thora and the kidnapping of Thora, the kidnapping and death of Dorothy, likely, right?
But what about the blonde, right?
The blonde, she gets dropped from the news altogether.
Okay.
And so he gets this conviction. He's going to go to the gas chamber, but he is also fighting that conviction. At the same time, he also reveals that some of Thora's belongings are in his home. And investigators go to the home and they find a ring and a watch that belong to Thora that are hidden inside a lamp.
Did they find any other belongings in there from other women?
No, but we
Okay.
do know they found these belongings of Thora's, and they do have blood on them. And it's just, I don't see how you can continue to be doing this while also fighting your conviction. It's nonsensical. But I think in the end, what I think about him personally is that he does want these kind of almost theatrical kind of moments. It's all a performance to him. And who these women are don't matter to him. So again, he's fighting to get out. He's appealing these decisions. And everyone knows that there's always the chance that he could be successful because they haven't found Thora's body.
Okay.
And
Or Dorothy's, right?
or Dorothy's. And they know that finding Thora's body will clinch this case. Their backup, they think, is Dorothy, right? He's not been charged in that crime, but you've got two missing people.
At least it's something.
Now, in April, a junk collector from San Francisco named Franklin Hogmeyer lowered himself over the edge of the cliff of Devil's Slide. His goal was to search the cliff face looking for cast-offs that he could sell. So he's just out there on Devil's Slide on a regular day. And
Oh, he's looking for things people drop
yeah,
that he could sell. Okay.
instead, what he finds is the remains of a woman, and it's Dorothy.
Okay. So he found Dorothy.
Yeah. And she is just where McMonigle had said he had left her. Now, this should be monumentous in itself. And there should be action moving towards some sort of arrest and conviction of Dorothy's murder. That does not happen. Instead, what they do is they realize that it's possible that Thora could actually still be down there despite the initial searches coming up empty-handed for her. So Hogmeyer is actually hired to search the cliffs looking for Thora's body.
So at this point, they're just like, okay, that's Dorothy, but we still want
Thora.
Thora. Okay.
Yeah, Dorothy is
It
treated
feels like
as
we could do both.
Right, so Dorothy is treated as an afterthought in this.
Okay.
Now, Hogmeyer, he's searching for days without success. On April 24th, he tries one more time, and this time he brings his wife, Lorene, with him. The plan is for Lorene to wait at the top of the cliff while he lowers himself by a rope down the cliff face. Now, when he comes back up for lunch, though, Lorene is gone.
Where did Lorene go?
This is one of those really fascinating story asides because everyone, all of the newspapers, and everyone has to start searching for Lorene.
Oh, she's gone. She didn't just get tired and go home?
No. So they're like, what is even happening at Devil's Slide?
Right. And she didn't fall over.
Well, so they do not think so
Okay.
because no one is out there except Lorene and Franklin. And so they begin to suspect that Franklin might have done something to his wife.
That's a whole story in itself.
This is completely fascinating to me because Franklin is also saying, I wasn't doing anything. Somebody must have come for her because I was down the cliff face, right?
Right.
So Lorene's story and Franklin's story is a complete side. So I'm going to tell it in my newsletter, Girl Hunt.
Okay.
So if you want to know more about Lorene and Franklin, that's the place to go.
Yeah, I do. Okay, so we'll look for that on Girl Hunt.
Yeah. So look for that, Substack, Girl Hunt.
Okay.
But what also happens is that everyone's looking for Lorene and trying to figure out what happened. So Franklin Hogmeyer, he is held for days. And
so that means he can't continue searching?
He can't keep looking for Thora. And he really seems to be the only one who had been actively kind of searching this cliff face for her.
Okay.
Now, though McMonigle would try to get his conviction overturned, his appeal is unsuccessful. They still haven't found Thora, so they're happy that this appeal has failed. Still, he's going to spend the rest of this year fighting against the pending execution, trying every means possible to escape the death penalty. As it became clearer and clearer he would be unsuccessful, McMonigle offered his body to UC Berkeley scientist Dr. Robert Cornish. Years before, Cornish had been experimenting in the revival of dead dogs, bringing at least one back to life, even though it had been rendered blind by this experiment.
Wait a minute. What are we even talking about now?
Yeah.
We were just talking about a kidnapping case, and now you're telling me that somebody actually successfully brought a dead dog back to life at some point? How did I not know about this?
Yeah, this is one of those aside stories that I didn't know the history of, and does warrant maybe a deeper dive at some point. But Dr. Robert Cornish was deeply interested in whether or not you could revive somebody or something from the dead. Kind of not quite in a Victor Frankenstein sort of way, but...
Well, he's not piecing them together. He's just bringing them back.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he claims he had been successful on at least one dog at this point that he had named Lazarus, of course. And he had previously, many years before, wanted to continue these experiments specifically on death row inmates. So this is not out of any sort of enjoyment of them being death row inmates. It's just that this, he felt, was like a practical solution to experiment on human bodies.
So it was a body that was available and fresh?
A body that would be available and fresh. And also, he kind of felt like if things went wrong...
Oh, then it's okay because that's still the intended outcome.
Right.
Okay.
Now, he had been denied this.
By the people on death row or by...
By the government.
By the
government was like,
okay.
You are not going to practice revivification on death row inmates. And so he had largely ended this hope at this point. But then McMonigle comes in and offers his body for this specific science experiment. Now, Cornish is reignited by this offer. And so he's writing to everyone, begging them to let him do this experiment on McMonigle. Mm-hmm. Now, Warden Clinton Duffy at San Quentin refused this experiment. San Quentin prisoners were being executed by gas chamber. And he said no one would be able to safely access McMonigle's body for over an hour after he was executed. So this would have rendered Cornish's experiment impossible anyway. But McMonigle, this was not the only offer he made. He also asked that his eyes be donated to a blind girl in Los Angeles. Her name was Patsy Ruth Fergus, and she had been in the news because she had been barred from attending school because her guide dog was not permitted to enter the school building.
So now he suddenly wants to help somebody? He wants to help multiple people.
Yeah, I don't think he does. I think this is just another way for him to delay what is happening and also to create another performance around his crimes. On February 20th, 1948, he was brought to the gas chamber at San Quentin. In his final written statement addressed to the people of California, he denied that he had killed Thora. McMonigle had said, "I didn't kill the girl. When her body is found, there will be no bullet wound in it, and that will prove my point." Thora's body has never been found. On the morning of November 2nd, 1945, Frank Chamberlain kissed his daughter goodbye. She rode her bicycle to a friend's house, left it there, and walked the rest of the way to school. She was 14 years old, and she was going to a football game. She had painted a cowbell red and blue with her own hands. That is the last ordinary thing we know about her day. Thomas McMonigle went to the gas chamber, still insisting he had not killed her. He had offered his body to science. He had drawn maps. He had confessed 5 times to 5 different versions of what he had done and where he had left her. And in the end, none of it led anywhere. She has never been found. Her mother knew the darn in her sock. Her father had just brought her shoes home from the cobbler. Her friends saved a seat for her at a game that she never attended. We don't know where she is. We know who she was. Her name is Thora Chamberlain.
The Resurrection, Thora Chamberlain, 14, missing since November 2nd, 1945, from Campbell, California. Let us stand at the edge of the cliff, where the gulls circle overhead and the Pacific churns beneath our feet. Behind us, the twisting road, as though we're meant to be anywhere else, not here, calling, come forth into the howl of the wind. The winter grass swaying in the dark of this night. Come forth and rise again, from the salt, from the sand, from the edges of this world. On this night, we waited for the resurrection song to begin, but no one answered back. So we called her name into the black and listened to the echo of our voices, and then we made a place for her in our mouths and taught the shape of her name as we placed a sheaf of wheat in her arms.
For more information about our show, please visit shegoesbyjanepodcast.com.
Bye, Vanessa.
Bye, Amy.